The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood quietly in her private sitting room, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the official letter that had arrived just hours earlier. The royal seal at the top seemed to mock her as she read the words again, hoping somehow they would change. William would be leaving for a 6-month diplomatic mission to Australia and New Zealand. It was an honor, the letter explained, a crucial assignment that would strengthen Commonwealth ties during a particularly delicate political period. But to Catherine, it felt like the world was crumbling beneath her feet. She had always known that royal duty would demand sacrifices. From the moment she said yes to William's proposal, she understood that their lives would never truly belong to them alone, but 6 months felt like an eternity, especially now when their relationship had finally found its peaceful rhythm after years of public scrutiny and private struggles. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly fold the letter and place it on the mahogany side table. William appeared in the doorway, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. He had clearly been looking for her, probably wondering why she had disappeared so suddenly after breakfast. "Kate," he said softly, using the name that only he and her closest family were allowed to use in private. "We need to talk about the assignment." She turned to face him, trying to compose herself, but William knew her too well. He could see the pain she was trying to hide behind her practiced royal smile. In 3 quick steps, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as if he could shield her from the reality they both had to face. "I know what you're thinking," he whispered into her hair. "But this isn't goodbye forever. It's just temporary." Catherine pulled back slightly to look at him, her green eyes already showing the first hints of tears she had been fighting all morning. 6 months, William. 6 months without you here, without our morning walks in the garden, without our quiet dinners when the children are asleep. The mention of their children made William's jaw tighten. George was only 5, Charlotte 3, and little Louis had just celebrated his first birthday. The thought of missing 6 months of their precious childhood years felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. "The children will understand," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're strong, just like their mother." Catherine shook her head, a single tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "George keeps asking why Daddy has to go so far away. How do I explain to a 5-year-old that duty comes before family? How do I make him understand something I'm struggling to accept myself?" William wiped away her tear with his thumb, his own eyes beginning to glisten. "Because it's who we are, Kate. It's what we signed up for when we chose this life together. But it doesn't make it any easier." They stood there in silence for several minutes, holding each other as the morning light continued to shift and change around them. Outside, they could hear the distant sounds of London waking up. Traffic beginning to build, people starting their ordinary days with ordinary problems. How different their world was from everyone else's. "Remember our wedding day?" William said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "When we promised to support each other through everything?" Catherine nodded, her face still pressed against his shoulder. "In good times and bad, in sickness and health. We didn't say anything about diplomatic missions and royal duties." William attempted a weak smile. "Maybe we should have added that to our vows." Despite her sadness, Catherine couldn't help but laugh softly. Along with dealing with paparazzi, state dinners, and never being able to go to the grocery store like normal people. "Especially the grocery store part," William agreed, and for a moment they both smiled at the absurdity of their situation. But the lightness faded quickly as reality set back in. William would be leaving in just 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prepare the children, to arrange Catherine's schedule so she could manage her royal duties alone, to somehow compress months of conversations and moments into a handful of days. "I'll write to you every day," William promised, "and we'll video call whenever the time zones allow it." "It won't be the same," Catherine replied, though she appreciated his efforts. "I won't be able to touch your hand when you're stressed about a difficult meeting. You won't be there to help me when Charlotte has one of her tantrums or when George needs help with his reading." William pulled her closer again, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one she had worn on their first official date all those years ago. "We'll make it work, Kate, we always do. Do we?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. "Sometimes I wonder if we're so busy being the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge that we forget how to just be William and Kate." Her words hit him like a physical blow, because he knew there was truth in them. The demands of royal life had intensified significantly since their marriage, and sometimes days would pass where they barely had time for a real conversation, let alone moments of genuine intimacy. That's exactly why this separation feels so terrifying, Catherine continued. What if 6 months apart makes us realize we've grown into strangers who just happen to share a title and a bed? William took her face in his hands, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. Listen to me, Catherine Elizabeth Middleton Wales. You are not just my wife or my duchess. You are my best friend, my anchor, the person who keeps me grounded when the weight of the crown feels too heavy. 6 months, 6 years, 60 years, nothing will change that. His words were fierce, desperate, as if he could will them to be true through sheer determination. And maybe he could. Maybe love really was strong enough to survive the impossible demands of their extraordinary life. As they held each other in that sun-drenched room, neither of them knowing that this moment would become one of their most cherished memories, they both tried to memorize every detail. The way her head fit perfectly in the curve of his neck, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her ear, the feeling of being completely safe in each other's arms. Outside, the world continued turning, but inside Kensington Palace, time seemed to stand still for the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, savoring what they knew might be their last peaceful moment together for a very long time. The following morning brought no relief from the heavy atmosphere that had settled over Kensington Palace. Catherine woke before dawn, her internal clock disrupted by the anxiety that had been keeping her awake for hours. Beside her, William lay sleeping, but she could see the tension in his face even in rest. His brow was furrowed, and his jaw was clenched, clear signs that his subconscious mind was wrestling with the same concerns that plagued her waking hours. She slipped quietly from their bed and padded barefoot to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains to reveal a gray London morning. The sky matched her mood perfectly, overcast and threatening rain. In just 13 days, William would board a plane that would take him to the other side of the world, and she would be left to manage everything alone. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. As a member of the royal family, Catherine had grown accustomed to pressure, but this was different. She wouldn't just be representing herself or even just the monarchy. She would be filling William's shoes while he was away, attending events they normally handled together, making decisions that would typically be made as a team. "You're up early," William's voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to see him sitting up in bed, his hair disheveled from sleep, watching her with concern. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I keep thinking about everything that needs to be arranged before you leave." William got up and joined her at the window, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "We'll figure it out together. We always do we?" Catherine leaned back against his chest, grateful for his warmth. "This feels different, William. Bigger than anything we've faced before." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as London slowly came to life below them. Early commuters hurried along the sidewalks, their umbrellas already in hand despite the fact that the rain hadn't started yet. Normal people living normal lives, Catherine thought with a pang of envy. "I've been thinking," William said eventually. "Maybe we should tell the children today." Catherine's stomach lurched. They had been putting off this conversation, both of them knowing how difficult it would be. "Are you sure we're ready for that? Are we ever going to be ready?" William asked gently. "But they deserve to know what's happening, and we need time to help them process it before I actually leave." Catherine knew he was right, but the thought of seeing the confusion and hurt in their children's eyes made her want to postpone the conversation indefinitely. George, in particular, had become so attached to their family routines. Every morning he would run into their bedroom and climb into bed between them, chattering about his dreams or his plans for the day. The idea of explaining to him that Daddy wouldn't be there for those morning conversations for 6 whole months seemed impossibly cruel. "How do we even begin to explain this to them?" Catherine asked, turning in William's arms to face him. "George is just starting to understand what our royal duties mean, but this is so much more complex." "We tell them the truth," William replied, though his voice wavered slightly. "That sometimes Mummy and Daddy have important jobs to do that take us away from home, but that doesn't mean we love them any less." "And when George asks why you can't just say no to this assignment?" William was quiet for a long moment. Then I tell him that sometimes being a prince means making sacrifices for the good of other people, even when it hurts. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of small feet running down the hallway outside their room. Within seconds, their bedroom door burst open and George came racing in, his pajamas wrinkled and his hair sticking up in every direction. Close behind him came Charlotte, still clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, and their nanny carrying baby Louie. "Mummy, Daddy." George launched himself onto their bed with the enthusiasm that only a 5-year-old could muster. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast, please?" Catherine and William exchanged a look over George's head. The innocence and joy in their children's faces made what they had to do even more difficult. How could they shatter this perfect morning routine with news that would change everything? "Pancakes sound wonderful," Catherine said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Why don't we all go down to the kitchen together?" The family made their way downstairs, the children chattering excitedly about their plans for the day. George wanted to work in the garden with William. Charlotte was hoping to have a tea party with her dolls, and Louis was content to babble happily from his high chair, reaching for everything within his grasp. As they prepared breakfast together, a rare luxury in their busy lives, Catherine found herself memorizing every detail. The way William patiently helped George crack eggs into the mixing bowl, even though it would have been faster to do it himself. The sound of Charlotte's delighted giggles as she stirred the pancake batter with intense concentration. The warmth of Louis's tiny hand as he grabbed her finger while she fed him his morning bottle. These were the moments that made all the royal obligations worthwhile. These simple, precious family moments that reminded them who they really were beneath all the titles and responsibilities. After breakfast, when the children were settled in the playroom with their nanny, William and Catherine knew they couldn't postpone the conversation any longer. They called George and Charlotte back to the sitting room, and Catherine's heart broke a little at how excited they looked, clearly thinking they were about to be told about some fun family activity. "We need to talk to you both about something important," William began, pulling Charlotte onto his lap while George settled beside Catherine on the sofa. "Are we going on a trip?" George asked hopefully. "Can we visit Granny?" "Not exactly," Catherine said gently. "Daddy has to go on a special work trip. A very long one." The excitement faded from George's face immediately. "How long?" William swallowed hard before answering. 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. George's young mind was clearly trying to process what 6 months meant, while Charlotte looked between her parents with growing confusion. That's a really long time," George said finally, his voice small. "Why do you have to go for so long?" "Because I have an important job to do," William explained. "I need to visit Australia and New Zealand to help solve some problems and make sure everyone there knows how much we care about them." "But can't someone else do it?" Charlotte asked, her lower lip beginning to tremble. Catherine felt her own tears threatening as she watched her children struggle to understand. "Sometimes, sweetheart, there are jobs that only Daddy can do. It's part of being a prince." "I don't want Daddy to be a prince anymore," George said suddenly, his voice fierce with 5-year-old determination. "I want him to just be my daddy." William lifted George onto his other knee, holding both of his older children close. "I will always be your daddy first," he promised. "Being a prince is just my job, like how some daddies are doctors or teachers. But being your father is who I am. Will you miss my birthday?" Charlotte asked, and Catherine's heart shattered completely at the question. William's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. "I don't know, sweetheart. But if I do, we'll have the biggest celebration when I come home. Promise?" George demanded. "I promise," William said, sealing it with a kiss on top of George's head. As the family sat together on the sofa, holding each other tightly, Catherine realized that this moment was both an ending and a beginning. The end of their carefree family routine, but perhaps the beginning of a deeper understanding of what their love could withstand. The days that followed their conversation with the children passed in a blur of preparations and mounting tension. Catherine threw herself into organizing William's departure with the same methodical approach she brought to all her royal duties. But underneath her composed exterior, panic was beginning to set in. Lists covered every surface of her private office. Contact information for the Australian and New Zealand teams, schedules for video calls that would work across time zones, detailed instructions for managing the children's routines in William's absence. She worked late into the night, as if the act of planning could somehow make the separation more bearable. William, meanwhile, was consumed with briefings and meetings. Foreign office officials paraded through Kensington Palace at all hours, loading him with information about trade negotiations, diplomatic protocols, and cultural sensitivities. The weight of responsibility was enormous. This wasn't just a ceremonial visit, but a crucial mission that could affect relationships between Britain and two of its most important Commonwealth partners. "You're exhausting yourself," William said one evening, finding Catherine still at her desk at nearly midnight, surrounded by papers and her laptop glowing in the dim light. "I need to make sure everything is perfect," she replied without looking up from the screen. "If something goes wrong while you're gone, if I miss some important detail..." "Kate." William's voice was firm but gentle. He pulled a chair beside her desk and sat down, taking her hands in his. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she turned away from her work. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion and stress, and William felt a sharp pang of guilt. He was asking so much of her. To be both mother and father to their children, to handle her own royal duties, and to support him from thousands of miles away. "You don't have to be perfect," he said softly. "You just have to be you. That's more than enough." Catherine's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "What if it's not enough, William? What if I can't handle everything on my own? What if the children need something I can't give them? Then you call your parents, or my father, or Harry, or any of the dozen people who love our family and want to help. You don't have to carry this alone." "But I want to prove that I can do this," Catherine admitted, voicing the fear she had been carrying since the assignment was first announced. "Everyone will be watching to see if I can step up in your absence. If I fail..." "You won't fail," William interrupted. "But even if you struggled, even if you made mistakes, it wouldn't change how I feel about you or how proud I am to call you my wife." His words brought fresh tears to her eyes. But these felt different, cleaner somehow, like rain washing away dust. "I'm scared, William. I'm scared of being without you. Scared of missing you so much it affects the children. Scared that 6 months will feel like 6 years. William pulled her into his arms, and she allowed herself to truly break down for the first time since this all began. She sobbed against his shoulder while he held her, his own eyes filling with tears he had been fighting for days. "I'm scared too," he admitted, when her crying finally subsided. "I'm terrified of missing Louis's first steps, or George losing his first tooth, or Charlotte's first day of school. I'm scared that when I come home, things will have changed in ways I can't undo." They held each other in the quiet of her office, both of them finally acknowledging the magnitude of what lay ahead. Outside, London slept peacefully, unaware that the future king and queen were clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. The next morning brought an unexpected gift, a rare, completely free day with no official engagements for either of them. William suggested they spend it as a normal family, as if the looming separation wasn't hanging over their heads like a storm cloud. They started with a private breakfast in the garden, something they rarely had time for during busy periods. The children were delighted by the novelty of eating outside, and even the London weather cooperated, providing weak but welcome sunshine. "Can we go to the park?" George asked, syrup from his pancakes smeared across his cheek. "The big park with the swings?" Catherine and William exchanged glances. Public outings required security arrangements, crowds, photographers, everything they were trying to escape from for just one day. "How about we set up our own park right here?" William suggested. "We could bring out the football goal and have a proper match." "Can Mummy play too?" Charlotte asked. "I think Mummy might be too competitive for you," William teased, earning a playful swat from Catherine. "I am not competitive," she protested. "I just don't like to lose." The morning dissolved into the kind of chaos that only comes from 3 young children playing in a large garden. Football gave way to hide-and-seek, which evolved into an elaborate game of make-believe where George was a knight, Charlotte was a princess, and William and Catherine were apparently both dragons who needed to be defeated. Catherine found herself laughing harder than she had in weeks as William chased the children around the garden, roaring dramatically and pretending to be wounded whenever they tagged him with their foam swords. This was the William she had fallen in love with, not the future king or the dutiful prince, but the man who could spend an entire morning playing silly games with his children and find it the most important thing in the world. After lunch, they retreated to the sitting room for what had become a family tradition on lazy afternoons. Story time. William settled into the large armchair with Charlotte on one knee and Louis on the other, while George sprawled on the carpet in front of him, and Catherine curled up on the sofa nearby. "What story should we read today?" William asked, though he already knew the answer. George's current obsession was a book about a brave young prince who went on adventures to help people in faraway lands. "The Prince Story," George shouted immediately. As William began reading, Catherine watched her family with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. This scene was so perfect, so complete, that it seemed impossible that it would soon be broken apart by duty and distance. She studied William's face as he read, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he did the different character voices, the gentle way he adjusted his hold on the children when they shifted to get more comfortable. She tried to memorize the sound of his laugh when George interrupted to ask elaborate questions about the story. When the book was finished and the children had been settled for their afternoon quiet time, Catherine and William found themselves alone in the garden again. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the grass where they had played that morning. "Thank you," Catherine said suddenly. "For what? For giving me today? For reminding me why this separation will be worth it in the end?" William took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We'll have more days like this when I get back. I promise." "I know," Catherine said, and for the first time since the assignment was announced, she actually believed it. "But for now, let's not think about tomorrow. Let's just have tonight." They walked back toward the house hand in hand, neither of them knowing that this simple afternoon would become one of their most treasured memories, a touchstone they would both return to during the long months ahead, when the distance between them felt unbearable. The final week before William's departure arrived with brutal swiftness, bringing with it a whirlwind of last-minute preparations and an undercurrent of barely controlled emotion that seemed to permeate every corner of Kensington Palace. Even the staff, normally so professional and discreet, moved with a subdued efficiency that suggested they too understood the gravity of the approaching separation. Catherine had stopped sleeping properly 3 nights earlier. She would lie awake beside William, listening to his breathing and trying to memorize the sound, knowing that soon she would be falling asleep to silence. During the day, she caught herself studying his hands during meetings, the way he gestured when he spoke, the small unconscious habits that were so essentially him. "You're staring at me again," William said with gentle amusement one morning as they reviewed his itinerary over breakfast. "I'm not staring," Catherine protested, though they both knew she was. "I'm just paying attention." "To what?" Catherine set down her coffee cup and looked at him seriously. "To everything. The way you always check your watch twice when you're nervous, how you tap your pen against your teeth when you're thinking, the fact that you still can't eat toast without getting crumbs on your shirt." William glanced down at his shirt and laughed when he saw the evidence of her observations scattered across his chest. "I'll work on that while I'm away." "Don't," Catherine said quickly. "Don't change anything. I want you to come home exactly as you are." The intensity in her voice made William put down his own cup and reach for her hand. "Kate, I'm not going to change. 6 months isn't long enough to turn me into a different person." "Isn't it?" she asked. "How do we know? We've never been apart this long. What if the distance changes how we see each other? What if you realize you're happier without having to worry about school runs and bedtime stories and all the mundane things that fill our lives here?" William was quiet for a moment, considering her fears seriously rather than dismissing them. "Do you want to know what I'm actually worried about?" Catherine nodded. "I'm worried that I'll miss so much of the children's lives that they'll forget how much I love them. I'm worried that you'll be so capable and strong without me, that you'll realize you don't actually need me at all. And I'm terrified that I'll be so focused on my work there that I'll miss the little moments that make life worth living." His honesty hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had been so consumed with her own fears that she hadn't fully considered what this separation meant for him. While she would be surrounded by familiar places and routines, he would be completely alone in a foreign environment, carrying the weight of diplomatic responsibility without his usual support system. "William," she said softly, moving around the table to sit beside him, "you could never be forgotten by your children. And as for me realizing I don't need you," she paused, searching for the right words. "I don't need you to take care of me or to make my life complete. I need you because you make everything better, because you understand me in ways no one else ever has, because when I look at our life together, I can't imagine wanting anything different. Even with all the complications. The duty, the protocol, the fact that we can't just be normal. Especially because of those things, Catherine replied. Because it means we chose each other not just once but every day. Every time we could have walked away from this life, from the pressure and the scrutiny, and yes, from separations like this one, we chose to stay. That has to mean something. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of George and Charlotte, who had apparently escaped from their morning lessons and were now peering around the dining room door with the guilty expressions of children who knew they weren't supposed to be interrupting grown-up time. "Can we come in?" George asked hopefully. "We promise we'll be good." Catherine and William exchanged a look, and then William opened his arms. "Come here, both of you." The children raced across the room and climbed onto their parents' laps, Charlotte settling with William and George with Catherine. For a few minutes they sat in comfortable silence, the four of them forming a complete circle of warmth and belonging. "Daddy," Charlotte said eventually, her small voice very serious, "when you're in Australia, will you still love us even though we're far away?" William's throat tightened. "Charlotte, my love for you and George and Mummy is bigger than any distance. It doesn't matter if I'm in the next room or on the other side of the world. I will love you exactly the same amount." "But how will we know?" George asked. "How will we know you're thinking about us?" William considered this question carefully. Children needed concrete reassurance, not just words. "Every morning when I wake up, I'll look at the picture of our family that I'm taking with me, and I'll think about what you might be doing. And every night before I go to sleep, I'll do the same thing. And whenever I see something beautiful or interesting, I'll take a picture to show you when I come home." "Can we do the same thing?" Charlotte asked. "What do you mean?" "Can we think about you every morning and every night too? And take pictures of things we want to show you?" Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes as she watched William's face light up with an idea. "That's perfect, Charlotte. We could make it like a game. Every day while I'm gone, you can each choose one thing to photograph or draw or write about, and when I come home, we'll share all our adventures with each other." The children were immediately excited by this plan, already beginning to chatter about what they might want to document. Catherine was grateful for their enthusiasm, but she could see that William was struggling with emotion. The reality of what he would be missing was hitting him hard. Later that afternoon, while the children napped, Catherine found William in his study, staring out the window with an expression of such profound sadness that it took her breath away. "Talk to me," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I keep thinking about all the little things," he said without turning around. "The way George always wants me to check under his bed for monsters before he'll go to sleep. How Charlotte insists I be the one to braid her hair for special occasions. The sound Louis makes when he's happy to see me in the morning. They'll still be here when you get back, will they?" William turned to face her. "George will be 6 when I return. Charlotte will be almost 4. Louis will be walking and talking and becoming a real little person instead of a baby. 6 months is nothing to us, but it's forever in a child's life." Catherine had no easy comfort to offer because she knew he was right. Their children would change significantly in his absence, reaching milestones and having experiences that could never be recaptured or shared. It was one of the cruelest aspects of their situation. That duty demanded such personal sacrifice. "Then we make sure that every day between now and when you leave counts," she said finally. "We don't waste time being sad about what's coming. We focus on being present for what we have right now." William nodded slowly. 5 more days. 5 more days, Catherine agreed. "Let's make them perfect." But even as she said the words, they both knew that no amount of perfection could make the approaching goodbye any easier to bear. The night before William's departure, Kensington Palace felt like a house holding its breath. The children had been put to bed hours earlier, after an evening that had stretched longer than usual as everyone seemed reluctant to let the day end. Even baby Louis had seemed to sense the strange tension in the air, fussing more than normal and reaching constantly for his father. Catherine stood in their bedroom, watching William pack his final items into the suitcase that would accompany him to the other side of the world. He moved with methodical precision, but she could see the slight tremor in his hands as he folded each shirt, placed each pair of shoes in its designated spot. "You've been packing that same jacket for 5 minutes," she observed gently. William looked down at the navy blazer in his hands as if surprised to find it there. "I suppose I have." He set it carefully in the suitcase and then sat heavily on the edge of their bed. I keep thinking that if I pack slowly enough, somehow tomorrow won't come. Catherine moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Do you remember our first separation? When you went to Wales for your training course right after we got engaged? That was only 3 weeks and I was barely an hour away by car. I thought I was going to die from missing you, Catherine continued. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. I must have called you a dozen times a day. You did call me a dozen times a day, William smiled at the memory, and I loved every single call. The point is, we survived it. We were stronger when you came back because we had proven to ourselves that our connection could survive distance. William turned to face her fully. This is different, Kate. This isn't 3 weeks of training. This is 6 months of being completely immersed in another world, another life. What if I get caught up in the work and the travel and the constant demands, and I start to forget what it feels like to be here with you? Catherine took his hands in hers, feeling the familiar calluses from his weekend polo matches, the slight scar on his ring finger from a childhood accident. These hands had held their babies minutes after they were born, had dried her tears during difficult times, had reached for hers countless times across dinner tables and in receiving lines and during quiet moments just like this one. Then I'll remind you, she said simply. Every phone call, every email, every video chat with the children. I'll remind you what it feels like to be home. And what if the time difference makes it impossible to connect? What if I'm always starting my day when you're ending yours? Then we'll make it work anyway. We'll send each other voice messages when we can't talk live. We'll write old-fashioned letters. We'll find ways to be together even when we're apart. William was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her words. You make it sound so simple. Not simple, Catherine corrected, but possible, and worth fighting for. They finished packing together in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the suitcase was finally closed and wheeled into the corner, ready for the morning's departure, they both stared at it as if it were some sort of enemy. I have something for you, Catherine said suddenly, moving to her dressing table and retrieving a small wrapped package. William accepted it with curiosity, carefully removing the simple white paper to reveal a leather journal, its cover worn soft with age. This is beautiful, but it was my grandfather's, Catherine explained. He carried it through the war, wrote in it every day no matter what was happening. My grandmother gave it to me when I married you, said it was for the times when I might need to remember that love can survive anything. William opened the journal reverently, seeing pages filled with her grandfather's careful handwriting interspersed with blank pages. Kate, I can't take this. It's too precious. That's exactly why you should take it, she insisted. I want you to write in it. Not official things, not diplomatic notes, but real thoughts. What you miss about home. What you're learning about yourself, how you're feeling. And when you come back, we'll read it together. William clutched the journal to his chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. Thank you. This means more than you know. I have one more thing, Catherine said, reaching into her jewelry box and pulling out a simple silver chain. Hanging from it was a small locket that William had given her for their first anniversary. I want you to wear this. She opened the locket to reveal tiny photos of their 3 children, each one perfectly fitted into the small space. So they'll always be close to your heart, literally. William's composure finally broke completely. He pulled Catherine into his arms and held her tightly as tears streamed down his face. I don't know how I'm going to do this, Kate. I don't know how I'm going to get on that plane tomorrow and leave you and the children behind. The same way you do everything else that's difficult, Catherine whispered, her own tears flowing freely now, with courage and grace and the knowledge that you're doing something important. What if I come back changed? What if 6 months of being apart changes us in ways we can't predict? Catherine pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. Then we'll figure out how to love the people we've become. That's what marriage is, William. It's choosing to love each other not just as we are today, but as we'll be tomorrow and next year and in 20 years. They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, both trying to memorize every touch, every sensation, every moment of connection. Afterward, they lay awake talking until dawn began to lighten the windows, neither willing to surrender to sleep and lose these final precious hours. Promise me something, Catherine said as the first birds began to sing outside their window. Anything. Promise me you'll take care of yourself, not just physically, but emotionally. Don't get so caught up in the work that you forget to process your own feelings. I promise. And you promise me you won't try to be perfect while I'm gone. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I promise. And promise me you'll lean on the people who love you when things get difficult. I promise that too. They sealed their promises with kisses, gentle and lingering, storing up affection for the long months ahead. When morning came in earnest, bringing with it the sounds of the household beginning to stir, they rose together and prepared for the most difficult goodbye of their lives. William showered and dressed in his traveling clothes while Catherine chose a dress she knew he loved, wanting him to have one last beautiful image to carry with him. The children woke unusually early. As if they too sensed that this was not an ordinary day, they were quieter than usual during breakfast, George asking serious questions about the airplane and Charlotte clinging more tightly than normal to her father. "Will you call us when you get there?" George asked as they finished eating. "The very first thing I do," William promised, "before I even unpack my bags. What if we're asleep? Then I'll try again when you wake up. We'll figure out the best times to talk and I'll stick to them no matter what." At 9 o'clock, the car arrived to take William to the airport. The family gathered in the front hall of Kensington Palace, a small group surrounded by luggage and the weight of approaching separation. William knelt down to be at eye level with George and Charlotte, pulling them both into a fierce hug. "I need you two to be brave while I'm gone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I need you to take care of Mummy and baby Louis for me." "We will, Daddy," Charlotte promised solemnly. "And remember what we talked about? Our daily adventures?" Both children nodded eagerly, already excited about their project despite the sadness of the moment. William kissed baby Louis, who gurgled happily and grabbed at his father's nose, completely unaware that this goodbye was different from all the others. "Be good for Mummy, little man. Daddy will be home before you know it." Finally, he stood to face Catherine. The rest of the world seemed to fall away as they looked at each other, both trying to find words adequate for this moment. "I love you," William said simply, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Come home safe to us. Always." Their final kiss was witnessed by their children, their staff, and the ever-present security detail, but in that moment, they might as well have been completely alone. It was a kiss that contained 6 months of love and longing, compressed into a single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, William picked up his carry-on bag and walked toward the door without looking back, knowing that if he turned around, he might not have the strength to leave at all. Catherine stood in the doorway with their children, watching until the car disappeared from view, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously with the knowledge that their love was strong enough to survive whatever lay ahead. 3 months into William's absence, Catherine had developed a routine that kept her functioning, but never quite filled the void his departure had left behind. She rose early each morning, before the children woke, and spent 30 minutes in the garden with her coffee, watching London come alive and trying to imagine what William might be seeing on the other side of the world. The first month had been the hardest. Everything in their home reminded her of him. The indent in his pillow that took weeks to disappear, his favorite mug sitting unused in the cupboard, the way George would automatically set a place for him at dinner before remembering that Daddy wasn't coming home. Catherine had cried more in those first 4 weeks than she had in years, sometimes in private moments of overwhelming loneliness, sometimes simply from the beauty of watching their children grow and develop without their father there to witness it. But gradually she had found her rhythm. The children had adjusted better than she had expected, though they each showed signs of missing their father in their own ways. George had become more serious, taking his role as man of the house with touching gravity. Charlotte had started talking to William's photo every night before bed, telling him about her day in elaborate detail. And Louis, now walking confidently and babbling constantly, would sometimes toddle to the window and call Dada, as if he expected his father to appear at any moment. The daily video calls had become the anchor of their routine. Due to the time difference, they usually connected when it was morning in London and evening in Australia. William would appear on the screen, sometimes looking tired from his long days, but always lighting up when he saw his family. They had developed rituals around these calls. George would show off his latest drawings, Charlotte would perform songs she had learned, and Catherine would hold Louis close to the camera so William could see how much he had grown. "You look thin," Catherine observed during one of their evening calls, studying William's face on her laptop screen. He was sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, still wearing his formal suit from whatever official engagement had consumed his day. "The schedule here is intense," William admitted. "Sometimes I forget to eat proper meals." "William Arthur, Philip Lewis," Catherine said, using his full name in the tone that always made him smile. "You cannot save the Commonwealth if you collapse from hunger." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with mock solemnity. "I'll do better." "See that you do. Your children need you to come home healthy." "Speaking of the children, where are they tonight?" "Bath." Time ran long, and then Charlotte insisted on a tea party with her dolls. "They should be down for stories in a few minutes." William's face fell slightly. "I've missed story time again." "The time difference is impossible," Catherine said gently. "You can't be available for everything. The children understand." "Do they?" William asked. "Really? Because sometimes during our calls I feel like I'm becoming more like a friendly stranger on a screen rather than their father." Catherine's heart ached for him. She could see the exhaustion and loneliness in his eyes, even through the pixelated video connection. "William, you are their father. Nothing will ever change that, and when you come home. When I come home, George will be 6 and Louis will be talking in full sentences and Charlotte will probably have learned to ride a bicycle without me there to teach her. Then you'll learn to love the children they've become, just like you loved the children they were when you left." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of small feet thundering down the hallway. Moments later, George and Charlotte burst into Catherine's sitting room, fresh from their baths and wearing matching pajamas. "Daddy!" Charlotte squealed, racing to the computer. "Guess what I did today?" "Tell me everything," William said, his whole demeanor brightening as his children climbed onto Catherine's lap to get closer to the screen. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine watched William transform from the weary diplomat into the engaged, loving father she knew him to be. He listened intently to George's excited description of a football match at school, laughed delightedly at Charlotte's attempt to show him her latest dance moves, and made appropriately impressed noises when they held up their artwork for his inspection. But Catherine also noticed what the children couldn't: the slight delay in William's responses as he processed the video lag, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he thought no one was looking, the careful way he held himself as if he were trying not to let his exhaustion show. After the children had said their good nights and been tucked into bed by their nanny, Catherine returned to the computer for a few minutes of adult conversation. William looked even more tired now that he wasn't performing for the children. "How are you really doing?" Catherine asked softly. William was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him debating how honest to be. "Some days are better than others," he said finally. "The work is fascinating, and I know it's important. The reception here has been incredibly warm, and I think we're actually making progress on some significant issues. But I wake up every morning in a different hotel room, and for just a moment, I forget where I am and why you're not beside me. And I go to sleep every night looking at that picture of our family and wondering if I'm missing the best parts of my children's lives for the sake of diplomatic relations." Catherine felt tears welling up in her eyes. "William, what you're doing matters. The reports I've seen, the coverage in the press, everyone can see how much good you're accomplishing there." "I know that intellectually," William replied, "but emotionally, it's harder to remember why any of this is worth being away from the 3 people who matter most to me in the world." "Because those 3 people are part of something bigger," Catherine said. "Because the children you're fighting for a better Commonwealth for include George and Charlotte and Louis. Because the relationships you're building now will shape the world they grow up in." William smiled for the first time in their conversation that felt completely genuine. "When did you become so wise?" "I've had 3 months of practice at being both mother and father," Catherine replied. "It teaches you a few things about perspective. How are you managing it all, really?" Catherine considered lying, telling him everything was fine, but she knew William would see through any attempt at false cheerfulness. "It's hard," she admitted. "Harder than I expected. Not the practical parts, the children, the royal duties, the public appearances. Those I can handle. It's the emotional parts that are difficult. Missing you, worrying about you, wondering if you're taking care of yourself properly, or if you're so focused on everyone else's needs that you're forgetting your own. I miss you too, William said softly, more than I thought possible. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for my phone to call you about something silly, or I see something beautiful, and my first instinct is to share it with you, and then I remember the time difference, and that you're probably asleep or busy with the children. Call me anyway, Catherine said firmly. Leave me voice messages. Send me pictures. I want to share those moments with you, even if it's not in real time. I've been writing in the journal you gave me, William said, every night before bed. Sometimes it feels like I'm talking to you. What do you write about? Everything. The formal events and meetings, but also the small things. The way the light looks different here, the sounds of the city at night. How strange it is to eat meals alone after years of family dinners. How much I love you and miss you and count the days until I can come home. How many days left? Catherine asked, though she knew he would know the exact number. 87, William replied without hesitation. 87 days until I can hold you again. We can do 87 days, Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. We've already survived the first half. We can make it through the rest. Can we? William asked, and Catherine heard the vulnerability in his voice that he kept hidden from everyone else. Can we really go back to the way things were before, or will this separation have changed us in ways we can't undo? We've already changed, Catherine said honestly. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and you've learned that you can carry the weight of important work on your own. But those aren't bad changes, William. They're the kind of changes that make a marriage stronger, not weaker. As they ended their call and said their reluctant goodnights, Catherine realized that she meant every word she had said. They were different, people than they had been 3 months ago, shaped by distance and responsibility and the daily choice to love each other across thousands of miles. But different didn't mean damaged. It meant they were growing into the people they were meant to become, both individually and together. The morning of William's return dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect London spring weather that seemed almost too appropriate for such a momentous day. Catherine had been awake since 4 a.m, her body humming with nervous energy that made sleep impossible. 6 months and 2 days after she had watched his car disappear down the drive, William was finally coming home. She moved through the early morning hours in a state of barely controlled anticipation, checking and rechecking everything, despite knowing that the household staff had already prepared meticulously for his arrival. Fresh flowers filled every room, his favorite foods were prepared and waiting, and his study had been organized exactly as he liked it, with important correspondence sorted and his personal items arranged just where he would expect to find them. The children had been up since dawn as well, too excited to sleep despite Catherine's repeated attempts to convince them that the morning would pass more quickly if they rested. George had insisted on wearing his best shirt, the one William had complimented before leaving. And Charlotte had chosen the dress she claimed made her look like a princess, which she was convinced would make Daddy extra happy to see her. Even baby Louis seemed to sense the excitement in the air. Now 18 months old and chattering constantly, he toddled around the house calling Dada Dada with increasing volume and enthusiasm, as if he could summon his father home through sheer force of will. When will Daddy's airplane land? Charlotte asked for what felt like the 100th time that morning, climbing onto Catherine's lap as they sat in the morning room pretending to have breakfast. In about 2 hours, sweetheart, Catherine replied, smoothing her daughter's hair, and then it will take him about an hour to get through the airport and drive home to us. That's forever, George complained from across the table, where he was listlessly pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. It's not forever, Catherine said gently. It just feels like forever because we're so excited to see him. But privately, she understood exactly what George meant. After 6 months of waiting, these final hours felt endless. She had been counting down the days, then the hours, and now she found herself checking her watch every few minutes as if she could somehow make time move faster, through sheer willpower. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Catherine's heart leaped until she saw it was from William's private secretary, not from William himself. Flight landed safely. ETA to Kensington Palace approximately 11:30 a.m. Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 90 more minutes, was that Daddy? Charlotte asked hopefully. That was someone who works with Daddy, telling us that his airplane landed safely and he's on his way home to us. The children cheered, and Louis clapped his hands enthusiastically, even though he clearly didn't understand what was happening. Catherine gathered all three of her children into her arms, breathing in their familiar scents and marveling at how much they had changed during William's absence. George had grown at least 2 inches and lost the last traces of toddler roundness from his face. He looked like a proper little boy now, serious and thoughtful in ways that sometimes took Catherine's breath away. Charlotte had become more articulate and confident, her personality blooming in new directions every day, and Louis had transformed from a baby into a walking, talking little person with definite opinions and an infectious laugh. William was going to be amazed by their development, but Catherine wondered if he would also feel the same sharp pang of loss that she experienced whenever she noticed how much they had changed. 6 months in a child's life was significant in ways that adults could barely comprehend. At 11:15, Catherine found herself standing at the front window of Kensington Palace, with all 3 children pressed against the glass beside her, watching the drive for any sign of an approaching car. Her heart was beating so fast she felt slightly dizzy, and her hands were trembling with nervous energy. "I see a car," George shouted suddenly, pointing down the drive. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she watched the familiar black vehicle approach the house. After 6 months of seeing William only through a computer screen, the reality that he was actually here, actually about to walk through their front door, seemed almost impossible to believe. The car pulled to a stop in front of the entrance, and Catherine had to resist the urge to run outside immediately. Instead, she gathered the children and walked with as much dignity as she could manage to the front hall, where they waited as they heard footsteps approaching the door. The door opened, and suddenly William was there, looking travel-worn and tired but unmistakably real. For a moment everyone seemed frozen, as if they couldn't quite believe this moment was actually happening. Then Charlotte broke the spell by launching herself across the hallway with a cry of, "Daddy!" William dropped his bag and caught her in his arms, spinning her around as she squealed with delight. George was right behind her, wrapping his arms around William's waist and holding on tight. "My boys," William said, his voice thick with emotion as he knelt down to embrace both children properly. "Look how much you've grown. George, you're practically a giant, and Charlotte, you're so beautiful I can hardly believe it." Louis, who had been hanging back uncertainly, suddenly seemed to remember who this tall man was and toddled forward with his arms outstretched. "Dada, Dada!" William's face lit up with pure joy as he scooped up his youngest son, holding all 3 children as close as physically possible. "Louis, you're walking and talking. Kate didn't tell me you were saying so many words." "She wanted to surprise you," George said proudly. "We all learned new things while you were gone so we could show you when you came home." Catherine stood watching this reunion with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the sight of her family together again. William looked older somehow, his face more serious and lined with the weight of responsibility he had been carrying. But when he looked at their children, he was exactly the same man who had left 6 months ago, completely devoted, utterly present, radiating love. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of children chattering and clinging to their father, William looked up and met Catherine's eyes across the hallway. The children seemed to sense that their parents needed a moment, and they stepped back slightly, still staying close but giving William room to stand. He walked toward Catherine slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. When he reached her, he stopped just inches away, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was memorizing every detail. "Hello," he said softly, reaching up to touch her cheek. "Hello yourself," Catherine replied, leaning into his touch. "Welcome home." "I've imagined this moment every day for 6 months," William said, "but you're even more beautiful than I remembered. You're just saying that because you haven't seen a familiar face in half a year?" "No." William shook his head. "I'm saying it because it's true. You're radiant, Kate. Stronger and more confident than when I left. Being apart from you was torture, but seeing who you've become..." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "I've missed you so much," Catherine whispered, "more than I thought it was possible to miss another person." "Show me," William said simply. Catherine didn't need to be asked twice. She stepped into his arms and kissed him with 6 months of longing and love and relief that he was finally home. It was a kiss that tasted like tears and happiness and the promise of being together again. Around them, their children giggled and made exaggerated, grossed-out noises, but neither Catherine nor William cared. When they finally broke apart, William rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you more now than when I left, which I didn't think was possible." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Welcome home, my darling. Welcome home." As the family moved together into the house, talking over each other in their excitement to share everything that had happened during their separation, Catherine realized that William had been right to worry that they would be changed by their time apart. They were different, stronger individually, more aware of their own capabilities, deeper in their appreciation for what they had together, but the changes hadn't damaged their love. If anything, they had proven that their connection was strong enough to survive anything: distance, duty, time, and the countless demands of their extraordinary life. They had chosen each other again across thousands of miles and months of separation, and that choice felt even more precious because of what it had cost them. The tearful embrace that had brought them back together would indeed touch the world when the photographs were released later that week. But for now it belonged only to them. A family reunited, a love tested and proven true, a new chapter beginning in the ongoing story of their remarkable life together.